Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to the National Sourcewater Collaboratives Learning Exchange webinar. My name is Adam Carpenter, and I am with the American Waterworks Association, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, Conservation Funding and Drinking Water Utilities, Part. Associations, organizations, and federal partners that work together as well as individually with their constituents to help policymakers, planners, agricultural interests, developers, citizens groups, and others integrate source water protection into key decisions. Highlighted in red are the organizations that are represented on today's presentation. Next slide, please. In 2016, to celebrate our 10-year anniversary, the Sourcewater Collaborative has launched the Learning Exchange. The Learning Exchange aims to strengthen the effectiveness of source water practitioners across the country by providing a platform to share experiences, transfer knowledge, and learn about funding and technical resources that are available to support their efforts. Stories of success that showcase projects and partnerships making a difference in communities across the country and how others may duplicate these successes. Knowledge sharing events such as webinars, brown bags, and virtual workshops are included, as are opportunities to converse with peers through online networking forums and social media, and shareable quotes, graphics, tips to support your organization's operation and outreach efforts, and technical and educational materials recommended to peers by collaborative member organizations and learning exchange participants. I encourage all to utilize these great resources. Next slide, please. The Learning Exchange kicked off in August 2016 to offer webinars, communications, and resources that are organized by the themes that you see here. All of the materials and supporting resources on each of these topics are available on the Sourcewater Collaborative website listed on the screen. Next slide. Today's theme, during today's webinar, presenters will discuss this webinar efforts of drinking water utilities and conservation groups who are partnering with farming organizations, operations, and landowners to protect their water supplies through the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP. Next slide, please. There are a couple of key opportunities for helping to protect drinking water that I just wanted to provide to lay a little bit of context for our presenters. First, USDA conservation programs spend nearly $6 billion per year providing various environmental benefits for on-farm production and other activities. Although water quality is already explicitly recognized as a goal of these programs, source water protection is not currently a specific focus, but is nevertheless represented in a number of different projects. The water sector can develop partnerships and work collaboratively to increase the focus on source water protection over time. And it's not just for the utility, it's not just contributing dollars, but help with the local working groups, the state technical committees, assistance with outreach, and all sorts of other activities can be helpful to improving conservation as well. Next slide, please. There are both opportunities today and later. We'll be hearing from several of the large projects that are ongoing that involve the water sector today, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Beaver Water District in Arkansas as examples. There's also a significant project in Savannah, Georgia. Apologize for the typo there. There are several new ones that have been announced for 2018, Mills River in North Carolina, Otter Lake in Illinois, and Milford Lake in Kansas. I also wanted to point out one particular item that you can also reach through the Learning Exchange. On AWWA's YouTube channel, there's a video overviewing our view on conservation partnership opportunities. Finally, the 2018 Farm Bill, which is expected to be debated in this spring, will bring more attention and potentially more funds to source water protection as an explicit goal. At least that's the hope of several organizations represented within the Source Water Collaborative. Next slide, please. A few quick housekeeping items before we get going. First, please type your questions into the question box in the control panel. We will not be taking verbal questions. Questions will be addressed after all of the presenters are finished speaking, and if you are addressing your question to a specific presenter, please include their name so we can properly address it. Next slide. After the webinar, Please note that the presentation and a video audio recording will be made available on the collaborative website and within the next week. Next slide, please. I'd like to quickly introduce our presenters. Jimmy Bramblett is the Deputy Chief of Programs at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service. Tariq Baluch is the Water Utility Plant Manager at Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Tariq will describe a current work that's supported by NRCS. And Sandy Formica, who's the Executive Director at the Watershed Conservation Resource Center. Up first, Jimmy will be providing a brief overview of the Farm Bill and the NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Take it away, Jimmy.
All right, thank you so much, Andrew, and good morning and/or good afternoon to all of you out there across the landscape, as the case may be. I am very happy to be back and talking with the Source Water Collaborative. Right now, I serve as the Deputy Chief of Programs within NRCS, responsible for program administration with our $4+ billion worth of conservation investments. Prior to that, I was our Deputy Chief for Science and Technology, and prior to that was the State Conservationist in Wisconsin. When the Regional Conservationist Partnership Program first came out, and so it did and does represent a lot of new opportunities to partner with local water treatment facilities, with local wastewater treatment facility operators. And if there are specific questions on some of those partnerships we did in Wisconsin, I'll be happy to talk about that a little bit as well. I can say before those two items, I was on an early tour in Washington, D.C. as a Chief of Staff for our Regional Conservationist. And in 2011 and 12, had a chance to partner with EPA and try to begin to help make some connections between NRCS and the Source Water Collaborative. And while there were some good tools at that particular point in time, nothing represents as good an opportunity as this Regional Conservation Partnership Program does. And so what I'd like to do is really just give you a sense of who NRCS is for anyone who may not know. With this number of folks, there's always some new information that needs to be transmitted. And as I'm walking through these slides, give you an encouragement to keep something in the back of your mind, and that is virtually everything I'm about to show you is part or can fall under the umbrella of RCPP. And so let's go to the next slide. So NRCS has a delivery system of roughly a little over 2,400 field offices across the country. One of the nice things about that delivery system is it helps us to be local. And being local is critical for us to be out there on the ground working with private landowners to address their resource issues and concerns, but it also gives us opportunities to have and establish relationships with individuals that have common interest in water quality improvements, soil erosion improvements, soil quality improvements, wildlife habitat, et cetera, et cetera. And as a reminder, everything we do is voluntary, and so sometimes that does give us an opportunity to make sure that what we do complements other regulatory responsibilities that state units of government and or local water treatment facility operators have to pursue. And so even though we're voluntary, it doesn't mean that we can't be advantageous in a partnership with many of you out there across the landscape. Next slide, please. So in addition to our general partnerships and actually developing conservation plans on the ground for individual landowners, we do have a wide variety of resources out there. On the left side of the screen, under general, our web soil survey is used virtually by every local government in the country to develop tax assessment type activities. But many folks don't also understand we have a plants database. It's the second most widely used resource within the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And as such, it provides all kind of information associated with the right kind of plants in the right kind of climate and the right kind of soils. So when you're working, whether you're working with NRCS or not with NRCS, we do have technical information that may be advantageous to you as you're trying to address water quality issues in your local jurisdiction. That's supplemented by our conservation practice standards that talk about if you're going to do a filter strip, as an example, what you should consider as a part of that filter strip, how seeding arrangements should be made, what kind of seeding mixes should be made, and the like. Then when we get into other types of technical assistance, we move into some of the program arenas. In addition to RCPP, EQIP, We offer support to other agencies in the Conservation Reserve Program. We do all the conservation planning and provide the technical assistance to FSA and their clients in their program. And then we also do some area-wide conservation or watershed scale conservation planning that helps us look at multiple landowners and cumulative effects of those landowners and the potential impact they may have on downstream stakeholders. So next slide, please. Just as a reminder, everything we do is basically science-based. We are a technical, science-based conservation planning agency. I have to throw this in even as the Deputy Chief of Programs because many times folks look at me as a person full of money, but we are trying to always address resource issues and concerns from a technical and science-based perspective. Every 5 years, we update our conservation practices with the latest research that's out there across the landscape to make sure that we're staying current on the information that we're investing out there across the landscape. Next slide, please. So I mentioned resource concerns a couple of different times. In general, when we talk about resource concerns inside NRCS, I show this slide just to help you understand that there's a lot of detail that we go through. Many times our partners, our landowners think in terms of improving water quality, or up on the upper left-hand side of this screen, soil erosion. But soil erosion for us takes on several different flavors. We got sheet and reel erosion. We can have wind erosion. Ephemeral gullies are classic gullies. And then we can have stream bank erosion. So we split these out basically in enough detail so that when we go out and we work with a landowner, next slide, please, and we walk through a conservation planning process. Basically, we're starting with that resource concern under steps 1 and 2, and then we're evaluating what those benchmark conditions are for that particular site. Based off of that benchmark condition, we're trying to compare it to what we call quality criteria or planning criteria. And so if we have a situation where a resource is not meeting its desired sustainability or its intended use, then we have a resource concern. We have a defined resource concern. And that's a critical sense of phraseology for us because it has a lot of programmatic and financial implications. Next slide, please. So in addition to the 2,400 field offices that NRCS has out there across the landscape, the 8,800 employees that we have in those 2,400 field offices, we also work with a variety of technical service providers. Next slide, please. Technical service providers basically are individuals who have indicated that they have and demonstrated the ability to do conservation planning. They get certified after they go through some detailed training activities related to our planning process, demonstrate that they have either the educational or the experience qualifications, like a professional engineer as an example, for a variety of engineering practices that we offer, and also understand our planning process, can identify benchmark conditions, compare them to quality criteria, and then plan the right kinds of conservation practices to address those resource concerns. Next slide, please. We also have, in addition to these technical service providers, there's roughly 2,000 of those individuals that get certified. We have 14 different conservation activity plans that they really help us deliver to landowners out there across the landscape. For those of us in thinking about water quality today, a comprehensive nutrient management plan, and then sometimes a drainage water management plan, or even some of the integrated pest management plan activities, feed management, grazing management, those can all have positive impacts on water quality downstream. In addition to the 2,000 certified technical service providers and our 8,800 folks out there across the landscape, there's another 7,000 core partners with whom we work. Many of you know them as Soil and Water Conservation District employees or Soil and Water Conservation District supervisors and their employees who work with us to deliver a lot of these same planning activities. Next slide, please. And this just gives you a sense of what it is that some of our technical service providers offer. As you can see, by the overall obligation since the 2014 Farm Bill, $43 million is a relatively small amount by comparison to, on an average annual basis, EQIP, and they're using EQIP funds, I should point out. EQIP is roughly $1.1 billion. Next slide, please. One of the things that technical service providers are helping us do today, and this is exciting for in the future, is they're helping us bring in big data and to automate our resource assessments. And so we have LIDAR collectively out there across the landscape. NRCS has generated soil information. There's good climate information out there. And so instead of us going out in the field nowadays and always having to measure the top of the slope to the bottom of the slope compared to a variety of other landscape features that we're observing, and then come back to the office and run a number of assessment tools, we actually are getting into a process and in a mode where we're beginning to automate some of our planning activities based off of all of this big data that's out there across the landscape. We're in a mode right now where we're trying to test how far we can do that, one, for efficiency, but at the same time, we want to make sure as we're doing that, we're maintaining scientific integrity. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about a couple of other programs real quick. Easements. We have formerly they were wetland restoration program, farm and ranch protection program, grassland reserve program. Now it's called ASAP. In our CPP, we have several partners that are pursuing easement programs upstream of water treatment facilities in order to help improve water quality. And collectively across all those programs, we have about 22,000 easements now over 5.2 million acres. And I should point out, these are some of the most complicated easements in all of the federal government. When other federal agencies pursue land management activities, generally they own that land fee simple, or they own that land outright. NRCS basically has 50,000 miles of neighbors associated with these easements, and then 22,000 neighbors with whom we share that land in the interest of that land. And so when we're doing some activities on wetland restoration, as an example, we're trying to make sure not only are we addressing and restoring hydrology, but we're improving wildlife habitat, we're improving water quality. And this really just this program offers a lot of opportunity for water quality improvements upstream of some of the facilities for which you all may have an interest. Next slide, please. This just shows a map of the country showing where our easements are located, these 21,000 some odd easements, 22,000 easements. Next slide. And then a quick summation about the economic impact associated with the ASAP program. Next slide. So moving on to EQIP, most folks think of EQIP as that one big pot of money for NRCS. And I'm going to talk a little more about that, but EQIP is our mainstay program. With EQIP, we are having to address a resource concern. And you might recall earlier in the comments I was making, a resource concern is defined by a situation where we have some kind of natural resource that is inferior to where it needs to be in order to be sustainable. Next slide. So with EQIP addressing the resource concern, like I just mentioned in item number 1 on the right, we have almost 200 conservation practices that we bring to bear to help address those resource concerns. There was roughly 47 resource concerns that I showed on the list earlier. Each one of our conservation practices has in that purpose statement which resource concern can be addressed by that conservation practice so that we maintain that sense of scientific integrity I alluded to earlier. Next slide, please. I should point out EQIP is locally led. This is where in my previous collaborations with EPA on source water collaboration, we tried to help articulate what these local work groups are, what they do, how they feed information to state technical committees, and the state technical committee makes recommendations to a state conservation. In general, they're looking at activities in a local county area to identify which conservation practices they'd like to prioritize. If there are any payment limits that they want to put on a conservation practice. So for example, when I was in state conservationists in Wisconsin, Northeast Wisconsin had a tremendous concentration of animal feeding operations. And because waste storage structures are so expensive, the local work group in that part of the country recommended that we put a payment cap on a waste storage structure so more EQIP financial assistance would be available to more operators and for other types of conservation practices in that part of the world as well. They also provide input and recommendations on whether or not payment rates should be 50%, 65%, 75%, and then which resource concerns we want to prioritize. Do we want to prioritize water quality in our local county area or local jurisdiction, or do we want to prioritize wildlife habitat? Or do we want to have a mix of those two and then break out a percentage of EQIP funding that goes to one of those resource concerns versus the other? Next slide, please. So I was talking about EQIP being a multifaceted animal, so to speak. Many of you may have heard us talk about our High Tunnel Initiative or Hoop Houses. There's an organic initiative, an air quality initiative, an on-farm initiative. We have conservation innovation grants you all may have heard about. We have Colorado River Basin Salinity Project and a variety of landscape initiatives. Next slide, please. So for example, 18% of the EQIP funding that we receive as an agency, we dedicate to these geographic areas with a focus on addressing different resource concerns. So in Georgia, Alabama, Florida, a lot of that is what we call the longleaf pine habitat. And so there's a lot of wildlife habitat practices that take place there. In the middle part of the country, the Mississippi River Basin, the focus is water quality. So each one of these landscape conservation initiatives may have different resource concerns that they're addressing. Next slide, please. Sometimes we have non-programmatic initiatives like soil health. You all have heard us talk a lot about soil health and all the benefits associated with soil health, which include improvements in water quality. Next slide, please. And then since the 2014 Farm Bill, I just wanted to give everyone a sense of these 200 conservation practices, which ones are the top ones that we're providing investments for. Because of the soil health push that we've made out there, cover crop has become our highest conservation investment, which is good to see because of cover crops address a wide range of resource concerns from soil health, soil quality, soil erosion, to water quality, to wildlife habitat. Traditionally, fencing has been our highest conservation investment. Many times that's actually to do livestock exclusion or to fence cattle out of a stream and then provide them alternative water sources, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. I do want to point out, because of the collaboration that we had in 2011, when I was in headquarters the first time, we did engage with EPA on a national water quality initiative. To this day, we still invest roughly $30 million a year in 12-digit HUC watersheds across the country. Many times we have these in watersheds that protect, help improve water, I should say, help improve water quality above water treatment facilities. And I should also point out these watersheds are selected in concurrence with your local Environmental Protection Division, Department of Natural Resources, or whatever the case may be in your respective state. Next slide, please. In addition to doing some conservation practices on the ground, we have more recently moved into edge of field water quality monitoring. We do these activities in those, not all, but those selected ones of those National Water Quality Initiative watersheds. We do it in selected watersheds of the Mississippi River Basin, Lake Champlain, and other targeted areas. We are now into the 4th year of having this particular edge of field water quality monitoring activity take place. And we are just beginning to get into the 1st year of actually having conservation practices installed in these situations, because the first 3 years we wanted to collect runoff data to establish baseline conditions. For those of you who are interested in water quality trading, this actually has a tremendous amount of benefit and information that can be used in helping establishing trade limits, dollar limits associated with different types of conservation practices. Next slide, please. I do want, even though we do have the edge of field water quality monitoring activities, I do want to point out that edge of field science is relatively new, is relatively immature. The point source science is much more mature, much more focused. We, from an agriculture non-point source pollutions perspective, have only recently moved out of controlled research plots from land-grant universities or other research sites into these edge of field monitoring sites. And what that does is it introduces new risk measures that are not taken into account when you're in a controlled research environment, such as market conditions and other climate conditions that really force producers to make certain types of decisions. So even though we have this new tool we're using in edge of field water quality monitoring, I do want to just caution everybody, it's still a relatively immature science other than the anecdotal research we have associated with research plots. Next slide, please. What we can say at a larger scale is that these conservation practices we put on the ground are effective. We've had something we call CEAP, Conservation Evaluation Assessment Project, and you can see from the various geographic areas some of the benefits associated at these larger watershed or project scales of the reduction, primarily in this case, of nutrients. Next slide, please. A CSP, I just want to make a quick comment about CSP. It's also available for the RCPP program. CSP is a program that's designed to help address resource concerns beyond what was initially addressed in EQIP. So in order to be eligible for the Conservation Stewardship Program, someone already has to be adequately addressing at least one resource concern. These are 5-year contracts, and then by the end of the 5th year, they have to agree to address at least 2 more resource concerns. So it's a much higher bar of conservation stewardship that we require out there across the landscape. And it is actually this year was one of the most popular years of this particular program. We have, in addition to the 200 conservation practices, over 220 conservation enhancements, or these are conservation practices above and beyond those original 200 that I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. And so for the RCPP program, everything I just talked about is something that's available to all of us in partnership with each other. The RCPP program became available to us in 2014, and since then we basically have finished out what's available to us to do as far as announcements are concerned for this particular farm bill. We have just announced our proposals for 2018. We are in the process of working with our partners to negotiate our agreements with them. I can tell you that we have invested roughly $800 million in the RCPP program. The goal for that program was to have a 1-to-1 NRCS to non-NRCS match. And our partnerships have actually produced almost a 3-to-1, not quite a 3-to-1, but another $2 billion worth of non-NRCS contributions to these projects. We have over 2,100 partners that are working with us through these RCPP programs. And I think we're going to hear from a couple of partners today who have taken advantage of this opportunity. And beyond the ones we hear about today, if anybody has any interest in looking at others in your particular part of the world, we'll be more than happy to talk with you about that offline. Next slide, please. So in addition to water quality, I just want to point out the flexibility and the range of opportunities that are available. Even while we're addressing water quality, we can still address a variety of wildlife habitat issues. And the success of our conservation practices have brought several species back from the brink of being listed on the TNE species list. Next slide, please. And another example is the monarch butterfly. Next slide, please. So in summary, basically, NRCS works one-on-one with individual landowners and in partnership with many other folks out there across the landscape to address needs and interest on individual landowners. We invest in their operations, not only to help address natural resource concerns, but to provide economic blueprints for them in their operations. And then we have a variety of other just technical information that if you don't get into some kind of formal partnership with NRCS, we have just a library of resources that may be available to you to help you address your interest and your needs from a water treatment facilities perspective. Next slide, please. So with that, I will stop, Andrew, and turn it back over to you.
Jimmy, thank you so much for that great overview of all the resources and mission of the NRCS. That was really informative information. Coming up next, we have Tarek. Tarek is the water utility plant manager at Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He will describe the Middle Cedar Partnership Project, MCPP, which focuses on working with local conservation partners, farmers, and landowners to install best management practices in the Cedar Rapids watershed. MCPP is an RCPP project. Take it away, Tarek.
Thank you, Adam. Just a quick sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Tarek, it's possible you may be on mute. There we go. Absolutely.
Okay, how's this, Adam? Yeah, this is Tarek Baloch. I'm with the City of Cedar Rapids.
Go ahead.
And today I'm going to give you a quick overview with regard to the project that the City of Cedar Rapids is involved in a watershed that's approximately an hour away from our municipal boundaries. I do want to recognize our project team here in Cedar Rapids. Steve Hirschner is the Utilities Director for the City of Cedar Rapids, and Mike Kuntz, the Environmental Manager for the city as well. So between the three of us, we really deal a lot with the project coordination and communicating with the partners. Barb Wagner was also a part of the team, but she retired at the end of December, so we have a void to fill there with all of the hard work that Barb did. Next. Because of the changes in the Agricultural Act of 2014, groups or organizations or entities such as municipalities like Cedar Rapids were able to submit proposals to basically come into the action in terms of conservation efforts. And we really appreciate NRCS allowing the City of Cedar Rapids to submit a proposal. We were awarded the project June of 2015. And with that, we had a pretty slow start, mid-year June, 2 years ago. And from that point forward, we've really made some great gains. And we can't really attribute any of our success other than to making sure that we recognize our partners that work with us. They've done a great job. The MCPP Partnering for Success allowed roughly $2 million of financial assistance to come into the watershed area. Our partnership group is contributing roughly $2 million of primarily technical assistance as well as some financial assistance. So with the clock starting June 5th, 2015, we've got 5 years in which to hopefully make some super gains in terms of water quality improvements as well as water quantity reductions. Next. I mentioned water quantity. This is an image of downtown Cedar Rapids back in 2008. This is the historic crest flood of record, if you will, of 31 feet. Flood stage for this area is 12 feet. So we really was an epic flood, impacted thousands of people, cost lots of money in terms of repair and restoration with regard to the mitigation and getting the city back together. But it also had a financial impact on businesses as well. So with that in mind, when we get ready to talk about flooding and water quantity, 8 years have gone by since 2008, and last year, September of 2017, we had the last, I should say, stand by. September of 2016, we reached a flood level of 22 feet, which is the second highest flood of record for this area. So as you can see, water quantity is an important issue, but from a water professional standpoint, water quality is definitely one of the targets that we're trying to focus on. Next. Cedar Rapids municipal water system is really related tightly to the Cedar River. Cedar River is about a 7,000 square mile watershed area that flows directly through the heart of downtown. The Middle Cedar area is roughly 2,400 square miles, and within that area, we're working with our farmers and producers in that area to affect about 135,000 acres. So as you see, the Cedar River is not the direct raw water source that goes to our treatment plants, but we're using groundwater that's highly influenced by the Cedar River. So whatever's flowing through the river ultimately has an impact on the alluvial aquifer located adjacent to the riverbed itself. Next. At our treatment plants and at some of our more technically capable raw water sources or well houses, we have the ability to monitor nitrate levels. And as you can see from this image, this is late May, early June reading that reads about 5.9 parts per million of nitrates. And 10 parts per million, or 10 milligrams per liter, is the threshold that we look for that triggers a public notification process. That has a lot of impact on our community. It's not just the residents who consume it that are at risk, but it also impacts businesses, hospitals, food manufacturers, and other users that rely on good, clean, high-quality water for their services and products. The image to the right there is one of our vertical wells. As you can see from the lower blue line, the top of the platform located back in 2008 was at that level. And when the floods came through in 2008, all of these wells were basically underwater. We had, of the 45 vertical wells and 4 horizontal collector wells, all but one well was submerged and unusable. So it took many weeks and many months, if you will, to bring these systems back online. Fortunately, we had the one remaining horizontal collector well that stayed in service, and that allowed us to provide a minimal amount of water to the system in order to keep the system pressurized. Next. So all along I'm talking about the MCPP, but not mentioning the MCPP, and we're going to get to that here shortly. But as you can see from this graph here, the seasonal flows and variations of the river impact the nitrate concentrations as well. So from the March through June period, we'll see a very, very significant spike. And in one particular point there, the value reached above the 10 milligrams per liter threshold set by the EPA, and that reached actually up beyond 16 milligrams per liter. And as I indicated, since we're not directly withdrawing from the Cedar River, the river does have an effect on our groundwater source. And as a result of that, our concentrations coming into the treatment plants approached 8.5, almost 9 milligrams per liter. So we were very dangerously close to meeting that threshold. Next. This graphic depicts the day's average daily nitrate concentration that was 10 milligrams or greater on the Cedar River itself. And in 2012, we experienced a drought year, and as you can see, it was a pretty low level of concentrations through the river. But after that, we've seen a steady increase of levels going up dramatically in 2013, and then basically leveling off in 2014 and 2015. These data points are provided by the USGS, or United States Geological Service, or survey that they are partners with us, as well as doing watershed water quality monitoring, not just in our local area, but all the way up to upper Iowa. Next. So how does the agriculture upstream relate to the businesses in Cedar Rapids? Well, we have roughly 25 industries that are major users of our finished water. we basically have, of those 25 users, they consume or use about 65% of our finished product. And as you can see, they're processing quite a bit of grain, 100,000 bushels of soybeans a day, over 1 million bushels of corn are processed every day in Cedar Rapids. So, and all of those products come from areas that are 10 miles away or hundreds of miles away from the city of Cedar Rapids. And whether they be directly from farm fields themselves or through an elevator or a co-op. But Cedar Rapids has an intimate relationship with the producers within our area. Next. And as we see, partnering success is a matter of talking about what's the best practice to put on the ground. But before you do that, you have to develop a very sound watershed management plan. And we completed that plan in 2015, December 2015. And after that plan was published, we actually started the execution of that plan, working with three coordinators within the project area. Two of those projects are existing projects, the Miller Creek project and the Benton Tama project. Miller Creek is administered by Shane Wolf, and Benton Tama is administered by Shelby Williams. And our project coordinator, Jason Gomes, is working closely with those two coordinators to make sure that there's very little overlap and duplication, but maximizing the amount of outreach in terms of how to connect with the landowners and producers in that area. And this gentleman pictured here is one of our farmer leaders. His first name is Nick, and he is just remarkable to talk with. He has been doing conservation practices really for a long period of time, even before this project came into his backyard. So we're looking for leaders like Nick and several others that are basically champions to talk about their successes, talk about what's working for them, and also to share those stories that aren't working for them, so that other tenants and producers and operators can learn from these experiences. But as you can see, we have lots of cover crops placed in the ground up there an hour from us. Nutrient management plans are really starting to pick up. And basically all of the practices that we're looking at, there's not a single magical solution there. There's a combination of efforts that tend to bring the most results or the best results when you're monitoring a tile system or looking at a stream sampling. So there's not just one practice out there that works for everybody. You have to really understand your practice or your operation and develop a suite of these practices to gain the most of what you want to do while maintaining profitability and making sure that you have good yields. Next. So with the idea of going up into the watershed north of us, we don't want to. The city of Cedar Rapids also wants to be seen as a leader. So we're actually looking at our localized watershed in terms of what we're doing as a city, in terms of watershed management authorities, in terms of what we're providing for incentives within the city or corporate limits in terms of cost share programs and other projects. And those smaller projects are working, and we're managing storm water runoff much better, and we're learning a lot about the language. Basically, when we talk about water quality and water quantity, that's something that most people really they appreciate. But when you talk to a farmer, for example, they're really interested in soil health, and that means a lot to them, and you need to recognize that. And I think it's important to do that so that there's a connection there. And so as a result of that, the city urban watershed efforts have really changed our vernacular. We're integrating soil health into the conversation much more and less about water quality. We're going to see and realize the benefits of water quality if soil health and soil initiatives are if we see improvements in those areas. Next. So what does the future look like for us? Well, we're midway through our project, and what we're hoping to see is improved soil health. And as a result of that, we'll see increased water quality, improved water quality. We'll see a decreased water quantity issues. You can expect a flood every spring within Cedar Rapids. We're hoping to minimize that so that they're not as dramatic like 2008, where we reached a 31-foot epic stage. So those are the things we're looking for, but we know it's not going to happen in 2 years or 5 years. We're in it really for the long haul. And 135,000 acres is just a small piece of the pie, if you will. We have an entire watershed that we all have to basically look at successes in all the sub-watersheds in order to aggregate and conclude that we've got a successful plan throughout the entire watershed. So we're looking at expanding other projects within the coming years. We're kind of excited to submitting proposals for future RCPP opportunities, and that's for us, a success means making sure that the city of Cedar Rapids is providing good, clean, safe drinking water to our consumers, and that we are minimizing the effects of flooding. And we're collaborating with our farmers and partners up north so that we can continue to enjoy that economic success in terms of the crops that are coming into this town. Next. And with that, I just do want to mention once again of the 16 partners that we have, they've all been awesome, and I do want to mention one partner in particular. The Iowa Soybean Association has been active in the Middle Cedar area as well as throughout the state of Iowa. They're very, very progressive thinkers. They're looking at innovative ways to reach out to not just soybean growers, but to all agricultural businesses within the state, as well as throughout the neighboring states, and set the example and set the tone for not just focusing on conservation efforts, but doing so in a way that promotes the best business practice as well, sustainability, and keeping these farming operations intact and profitable. And so we really appreciate the relationship we have with Iowa Soybean Association. And with that, Adam, I'm going to turn it back to you. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Tark. Thank you for that presentation. It was great to hear about all the great work that's going on in Cedar Rapids. I'd like to also introduce Sandy Formica, who is the Executive Director at the Watershed Conservation Resource Center. She will dive into the West Fork White River Watershed Initiative, which is a voluntary program that provides financial and technical assistance to agricultural producers for addressing water quality concerns in approximately 1/3 of the West Fork White River Watershed. The West Fork White River Watershed Initiative is a 2016 RCPP project. Take it away, Sandy.
Okay, thank you, Adam. My name is Sandy Formica. I'm with the Watershed Conservation Resource Center, and I'm going to talk to you today about our West Fork White River Watershed Initiative, which is an RCP project. Next slide. And I would like to start with telling you a little bit about our organization. WCRC for short. We're a nonprofit. We're located in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and we specialize in stream and river restoration, watershed assessment, watershed planning, government entities, and we're 13 years old and have 10 staff people. Next. So the West Fork White River Watershed Initiative is, as I said, an RCPP project. Jimmy spoke a lot about the program. One of the things that was requested in the request for proposals was to be innovative with the use of existing NRCS programs. And so that was one of the objectives. We submitted our application in July of 2015, and we were one out of 265 applicants, and about 30% were selected. And the contract was signed in September of 2016. So that gives you an idea of the length of time of the process from submitting an application to actually being able to start working on the commitment. And we probably started talking to partners a year before we even submitted the application. The total project was $8.8 million, or is $8.8 million, with 4.3 of that coming from RCPP. Next. We had 14 project partners. All of them are very important, but there were basically 5 key partners. The NRCS was providing the program. Our organization is the lead on this project, and we're providing the design and the technical assistance and the oversight. Beaver Watershed Alliance is the local watershed group, and they're the lead on outreach and the EQUIP program. And then Beaver Water District, which is our water utility, and the Walton Family Foundation together are providing about 72% of the matching funds. Next. So one of our differences in how we approached our project design was we focused on a smaller area, the West Fork of the White River, and we only did a third of it, but it's a major tributary that to the White River that forms Beaver Lake. And Beaver Lake is the drinking water source it's the sole drinking water source for 420,000 residents of Northwest Arkansas. The area is a priority for sediment and phosphorus reduction. So Jimmy had mentioned about the different critical conservation areas, in particular the Mississippi River Basin. This project addresses nutrients and sediment. And then it's also, the West Fork White River is on the 303D list for the state. And it's also a priority within our state non-point source program for reducing nutrients. As I said before, we're focusing on 1/3, and that's for the highest concentration for priority sites for restoration, which I'll talk about later. The other reason for making it a smaller area is it leaves two-thirds of the watershed open for future funding. Next, please. So we basically utilize 2 NRCS programs in our design, and one being the PL 566, which through that, after working with the state NRCS office, we could use that program to restore reaches of river with multiple landowners. And as far as we could tell, that was like the only program that could meet that objective. And so it enables the restoration of both agricultural lands and other properties. We also included the EQUIP program, so we could target best management practices at the same sites where we were doing river restoration, giving it a more holistic approach. And then we have a monitoring component to evaluate improvements. Next. The main objective of the PL 566 program is to do river restoration, and through that restoration we would be improving water quality, enhancing fisheries and other wildlife, and all landowners could participate in those projects. Next. And we hope to restore between 1 and 2 miles of river, 2 to 4 miles of riparian areas, and we expect to get 75% reduction of sediment and nutrients from accelerated stream bank erosion. And this in turn is is going to be a range between 3,000 and 7,000 tons of sediment reduction annually and 1,500 to 3,500 pounds of phosphorus reduction annually. We will also be storing wetlands and adjacent floodplains, and we plan on getting a minimum of 5 conservation easements. Next. So the EQIP part of the program, where we'll be implementing best management practices, also includes the development of conservation plans. As I said before, Beaver Watershed Alliance is the primary entity doing the outreach, though we do participate in that. It involves landowner presentations, site visits, stream restoration tours. They develop a quarterly newsletter. We're also developing conservation plans, both agriculture and forestry, and we're encouraging eligible landowners to apply for cost share to implement recommended BMPs. Next. And our outcome is we plan and have already almost worked with 200 individual landowners. We're going to develop 150 conservation activity plans and implement 100 to 300 EQIP practices. Next. Then the monitoring program, which I think was a strong point to our application, is we actually evaluate sediment and nutrient load reductions from river restoration projects. And so at our selected sites, we'll actually analyze stream bank samples, we'll collect stream bank profile data, and from that we'll estimate erosion rates and sediment nutrient loadings before and after restoration. And then we're going to evaluate improvements on pastures using the WET model. And then we will also evaluate gauge data, biological and water quality data during the life of the project. Next. So what were the keys to our project funding? And this is where I can talk more about our relationship with the water utility. But basically, I feel like we had a strong proposal because the WCRC already had established partnerships with those key players and more. We've done a lot of work with the municipalities as well and many, many landowners. The project design was built on a solid scientific foundation, and the watershed assessment and planning began as far back as 1998. And then we had an established track record of successful stream restoration projects in Northwest Arkansas. Next. So I'm going to talk about each one of those key components. You know, on the established partnerships, partners had already realized that they had shared regional conservation and water quality protection goals, and they understood that implementing high quality restoration protects our drinking water source, it improves water quality, reduces sediment nutrient loadings. And the reduction of the sediment nutrient loadings follows along the what Jimmy was talking about in improving soil loss. Then also the increased conservation in the region, it improves the quality of life in Northwest Arkansas, and that's going to attract your private foundations and your municipalities. But the project enhances aquatic and terrestrial habitat, and in turn it improves recreational use of the West Fork of the White River. Next. And then also it reduces land loss. So that includes agriculture, pastures, and forests and parklands. And basically these projects can save those lands for generations. It also protects infrastructure, saving municipalities and government millions of dollars. And the example in the photos below is a project on Neocoska Creek in Sweetbriar Park in Fayetteville. And that project alone protects agricultural land, private residents, a city park, and then it also protects a high pressure water line. Next. And then the second key to funding was the project was built on a solid scientific foundation. So the assessment work that began in 1998 was completed in 2004, and it was found that 66% of the sediment in the West Fork of the White River was coming from accelerated stream bank erosion. In 2010, the WCRC completed an NRCS project that also involved Beaver Water District, and we identified 29 unstable reaches of river within the West Fork White River watershed that was in need of restoration, and we prioritized those sites for restoration. And then the project also supports local watershed planning that's been going on for protecting Beaver Lake, the drinking water source for Northwest Arkansas. Next. And then the third component that I feel was key to our success is we already had an established record for successful stream restoration projects. And we take a natural channel design approach in which both the channel and riparian areas restored. So talking about channel restoration, it's based on stream morphology and a reference ridge prototype. And we restore the hydrology and we reconstruct defined bed features. We account for sediment transport. Because we prioritize sites for restoration, we end up working on high lot of stream instability and stream bank erosion. So this involves using heavy equipment construction, and it also involves extensive permitting, 404 permits, floodplain, and so forth. Next slide. We have a heavy component in our designs for establishing vegetation and managing the vegetation. The vegetation provides erosion control using live plant material. Eventually your erosion control fabric is going to disappear and you're going to have to rely on those plants to protect your project for decades. And we actually have come up with a system, and this has been through our experience of incorporating as many live plants during construction as possible. And then we use only native plants specific to the ecoregion that we're working in, and we do an invasive plant removal to improve the local ecology. So the photo that you see below is Tanyard Creek, and we've already constructed a towwood bench, which we see the water touching the, the wood touching the water. That structure goes 5 feet below the water surface to bedrock. And is providing habitat. And then the photo is just showing us finishing out the floodplain attributes that we created. And the middle photo shows the nursery grass, but all those flags that you're seeing are native plants incorporated during construction. And then the third photo is just after 2 growing seasons. And we probably have 50 or more different species of plants growing on that bench. Next slide. So I'm going to go through a series of projects that we have already built in the Beaver Lake watershed, which again, this is what helped bring our partners on board to support this project and provide the funding needed to match the funding. And this project is at the West Fork of the White River. It's an 80 square mile watershed. So this is the watershed that we're in. We've already got several completed projects in this watershed. And it involved the City of Fayetteville, a 319 grant, and both Beaver Water District and the Walton Family Foundation and other partners were involved in this. And it's been very successful. Next slide. This is a new project on the White River itself, which is what forms Beaver Lake. We just built this last year, and you can see through our, this is a towwood bench. It also extends under the water all the way to bedrock, so that's anywhere from 2 feet to 9 feet below the water surface, depending on where you're at on this bench. But this project is with the City of Fayetteville and also Beaver Water District, and has been huge in reducing erosion and sediment and nutrients. And this is about a 400 square mile watershed, so this is a pretty large river. Next slide. And I should tell you, all of these projects have been through catastrophic flooding, and they do require maintenance, but if you do ongoing maintenance at the sites, eventually you have less and less to do after catastrophic flooding. So this project was with both Beaver Water District and the Walton Family Foundation. It's at 120 square miles on the West Fork of the White River, and it's also been very successful. So the driving force for a lot of these projects is we're in the drinking water source watershed for Northwest Arkansas, and they do a really good job of reducing pollution and erosion in the watershed. Next slide, please. And then this is an older project on the White River. It's 6 years old, but these photos, I think, or the after restoration photo on top is where it's 5 years old. And basically, when you're floating the river, it's hard to even find the project anymore. But the lower corner shows 16-foot high cut banks. The middle photo on the bottom shows the project in the wintertime, so you can see it's stable in the wintertime as well. And the September 2016, you can't hardly take a photo from the bank anymore and show the project. So that's why we have the one on top showing it from the river. This protects City of Fayetteville agricultural lands that historically had been used for biosolids application and were high in metals and phosphorus. So this has been a really important project for resolving that problem. Those lands will not be eroded. Next slide. And then this is just a summary. Again, the established track record, it shows these are all the projects that have been done in Beaver Lake Watershed to date. And for just normal flow years without catastrophic flooding, we're reducing sediment by about 15,000 tons per year, and then 10,000 pounds per year of total phosphorus. If you took into account the big floods that we've had over the last 10 years, these numbers would go up. And again, I think when we complete this project, we'll be able to hopefully add around 7,000 tons of sediment to that 15,000 number. Next slide. And so who are the winners of these projects? The landowners, they basically stop losing their valuable lands, agriculture, whether it's agriculture, forested, or park lands. The healthy riparian areas protect the lands for decades, and then the restored stream features help to retain more water throughout the year. And then also the big winner is Northwest Arkansas, specifically Beaver Water District is protecting the drinking water source, cities and counties, the environment, and the aquatic and terrestrial habitat is improved, and recreational opportunities are improved. Next slide. And that's all I have. 2 more projects. One's below are Irvin. That's Mullins Creek at the University of Arkansas campus. It's about a 4-year-old project. And then the one on the right is Grand Cherry Creek at Kessler Mountain Regional Park. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sandy. I appreciate the great presentation. Give us a great idea of what's going on in your watershed. So I just want to remind everybody, keep those questions coming in. We've got a couple here that I'm going to get started with, but please feel free to type them in. We'll get to as many as we can during the Q&A period. So for the presenters, for the ones that look like they're designated for a specific person, I'm going to ask those first right now. Jimmy, I think this one is probably targeted mostly towards you. The question is, without specifically having source water protection / improvement as a criteria for evaluating RCPP proposals, is it possible for the next funding year to ask applicants to identify what drinking water sources are impacted by their proposed project?
Sure. So when you're developing proposals, and first of all, let me just reiterate something before I go on and answer the question. NRCS fully recognizes, and the reason I went to a little bit of a painstaking effort earlier to talk about technical service providers, we recognize that we can't do all of this stuff out there across the landscape, and we are extremely appreciative of partners like what we heard of in Northwest Arkansas and in Cedar Rapids. And it's always that local level group of individuals that take action and make things happen that make a difference out there in our natural resources. So to answer the question, we focus on resource concerns. We call it SWAPA, soil, water, air, plants, animals. And so that's always the basis of what we do. We don't have a resource concern that's dedicated to a facility or to a economic benefit. But having said that, when you're looking at developing proposals in the future and you can identify the benefits associated with that proposal, and when you're talking about, say, dollars saved for water treatment type activities, or individuals and groups and communities of individuals that are benefited by this project, that does factor into the minds of the review committee. And I should also point out, excuse me, once we get these proposals, we have a review committee, and these are made up of individuals not only from the national office, but from various state offices and field offices around the country, and even some of our partners. And they generally convene in somewhere in the central part of the country to go over these proposals and the review criteria. So it's not something where just individual decisions are made by a couple of folks at our national office. This group makes recommendations to what we call a grant review board, which is composed of myself and other upper management individuals within NRCS. And then we make our final recommendations to the chief. So just give you some sense of the review process. But as you're developing proposals and you can talk about who all is benefiting, that can only bode well for the proposals that come in.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jimmy. Sandy, we've got a couple questions for you. First question is your RCPP award a financial assistance or a technical assistance award? And if it's technical, have you had any challenges with NRCS reporting requirements?
Well, that's a great question. And so the reporting requirements and understanding the NRCS programs, not just that terminology that you said, but even you got to understand the EQUIP program. I mean, all of that comes into play in writing a good proposal and then actually carrying it out. And so I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer that off the top of my head. I think we're using both of them, but we have to refer back to our state office on a regular basis to make sure we're reporting everything correct. And we double check with them. So can you repeat that? They said technical assistance and financial assistance?
Is it primarily technical assistance or financial assistance?
I think we have both of those in there. Okay.
Fantastic.
but I would have to actually look that up, and I can and provide that information later if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Another one for you, Sandy. When working with landowners, what kind of incentives do you offer? Are you able to get matching funds for them, or are they expected to cost share?
Okay, so on the PL 566, that does not require any cost share from the landowners. And so we designed the project where we're utilizing the NRCS funds and our project partner funds to pay for all the river restoration. On the EQIP, we went with a 75% cost share unless it's the historically underserved folks, and that's 90%. But we are planning on using some of our partner funds to help pay for some of the cost share on the more expensive practices. So we didn't expect this, but a lot of the practices that the landowners want to do is stream bank stabilization. So we're already doing river restoration with the PL 566 program, and now the landowners, many of them are wanting stream bank stabilization, and we're going to be the ones doing that too. So that's actually adding some workload, but those projects are expensive, and we will be helping to provide some of the cost share portions. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Tarek, I wonder if the same question maybe applies to you in your project when working with landowners. What kind of incentives are offered there?
So yes, of course, the project total project amount is $4.3 million, and $2 million of that is financial assistance from NRCS directly to the producer. And once they complete the conservation plan and assessment and application process, then the NRCS works directly with those farmers, primarily producers that are landowners. And then there are cases where you might have a renter, maybe a tenant that is getting into a contract with the conservation office there. But on the partner side, we do have a mix of financial contribution, but primarily technical assistance, in-kind contribution. So there's a combination of both. And primarily with the EQIP, on the EQIP side, as Sandy mentioned, it's a cost share. The participants have some stake in this. Typically, it's 25% on the farmer side and 75% from the NRCS side.
Very good. I've got a couple of general questions that could potentially be addressed by the whole panel. The first question is, how do farmers define soil health? Is that a definition that's more fertile soil with less chemical additives? Or is it soil that has more organic matter to absorb more water? Or is it soil that can receive greater chemical inputs? There's just a kind of question on definition and what kind of the goal of soil health is.
So this is Jimmy. I'll take a first stab at this, and then let Tariq and Julie add to it. So the general definition of soil health is the physical capacity, or not the physical, the capacity of a soil to produce for its intended use. And it includes basically indicators that are related to physical, biological, and chemical characteristics. Traditionally, until the early 90s, a lot of activities managing and producing crops and agriculture were related primarily to just the physical and chemical side of the equation. So when we talk about the biological side of the equation, we're talking about all those little microbes that help cycle nutrients. And in the cycling process of nutrients that they take and move, they more or less put it into more plant available forms. And so we look at other indicators of the soil, such as porosity, aggregate stability, and it does include organic matter. So every increase in organic matter increases the water holding capacity by 27,500 gallons of water. That's an inch of water, which offers resilience in terms of times of drought, but it also offers resilience because it's a sponge when there are stronger storm events that are out there as well. And in addition to that, those benefits translate into, from an economic perspective, on average, roughly a 12% increase in productivity for the landowners themselves.
Yeah, I think I'm right in line with what Jimmy said, and the feedback that I received from the outreach activities that we conduct is, that these soils have to be productive and they have to, contribute to good crop yields, and they're holding water.
Okay, do you want me to?
No, go ahead. Sure.
Okay. So just a little bit different perspective. We have learned building these river restoration projects, when we are rebuilding those floodplains, you can't just use any soil. You actually need soils that have organics and have available nutrients in them. So we make sure that we provide a good soil medium for those plants that we're trying to get established. So that's been important to being successful in getting vegetation established quickly.
All right, fantastic answers all around. I have two questions that are very similar, so I'm going to combine them into one. Are there any suggestions for groups who are trying to build up collaborations or partnerships, or who are working in watersheds already, to take these partnerships to the next level?
So Sandy, you want to take that one first, and we'll work back, and I'll go last this time.
Okay, can you repeat that question?
Sure. Yeah, the question is basically for groups that are for watershed associations or other groups that may already be working on a watershed and want to develop and enhance partnerships and collaboration. What are some tips, tools, tricks that may be helpful?
Okay, so that's trying to get your foot in the door to work with, like, the water district or anybody else, right?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Well, I think, hang on one second, I can turn this thing off. I think that basically government agencies and water districts are wanting to work with watershed organizations. So you probably have more influence than you know. And so I think you just need to reach out to them and go to their meetings. See if you can come up with a meeting to say what your concerns are, and try to find ways that you can work together. We've been in Arkansas, we've been doing watershed management and encouraging watershed groups to develop for, I think, at least 15 years. So there usually isn't, we don't have an issue with watershed groups being able to work with the different partners. But that's what I would suggest. And, build your reputation, look for a project that you can do, and look for partners when you do that project. But start small and build your reputation. I hope that's what you were looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts?
I would say that as you're identifying your trying to correct your problems, whatever your problem is, understand what the problem is, focus on those particular areas that are very high concern, and make that your priority. But then from there, develop a plan, and part of your plan should incorporate developing relationships. You have to develop relationships with not just the Soil and Water Conservation District offices, but also with those specialists that work in that area, the certified crop advisors, your commodity groups that are very influential in those areas, and making sure that you're not coming in there with we're going to make changes. What you want to do is create a situation and environment where you're going to tackle those problems together, because it may not be a problem for somebody else.
and this is Jimmy, so I'll just add about 3 different things here real quick. Sandy mentioned during her presentation that it does take time to get organized. And so she alluded to it also in the answer here. And then as Tariq is saying, the second part is when you're identifying what it is you're going to address, the more you can articulate what the issue is in a quantitative fashion, and then estimate, okay, if we are planning to pursue these type of activities, here's the potential impact we think we're going to be able to make. And there's a lot of data out there that's available to help you estimate or simulate. If X number of conservation practices are installed, we expect Y types of outcomes. When you do that from a review panel's perspective, that tells that review panel that this group has done their homework, they have a clear handle on what the issue is, they have clear idea about how they want to address the issue, and they are also giving us some sense of reality in that we can't tackle the whole issue, but here's the contribution we think we can make toward that issue. And then the third thing I'll just want to point out to everybody here, since we mentioned PL 566 in Northwest Arkansas, it's important for everybody to understand that's a different flavor. It's an available program under RCPP, but it is a much more complicated planning program. It requires that there be planning to the point of having an environmental assessment, a Federal Register reviews, FONSIs, and a much more formal NEPA process than some of the other RCPP projects that are out there that don't use PL 566. So just be cognizant of that if you're interested in trying to pursue that. I should also point out, you could look on the NRCS website. We anticipate having some RCPP training coming up at some point in the not too distant future for those that are interested in continuing on. And so I don't know if that information will be posted this month, but it may be next month or the following before we're able to, we want to get past these 2018 agreements, but then we want to continue to engage partners who are interested in this program because we have full assurance that it's going to continue on after the 2018 Farm Bill.
So if I could add, if I could add something about the PL 566, we're in the middle of doing that environmental assessment, and when we were just developing this application, we did meet with NRCS, and it was explained to us how complicated it was to utilize that program, but they did feel like the WCRC and the other entities we were going to have involved, that we did have the technical resources to do it. But Jimmy is correct, it's very, very complicated. And I think because we had, you know, all the environmental assessment work starting back from 1998 and all the watershed planning work that went along with that, that made it feasible for us to utilize that program, but it's definitely not for everybody.
All right, very good. We have a lot of great questions in the queue. Looks like we won't be able to get to all of them. I'm going to go ahead and ask one more closing question to everybody, and then we'll do our best to get back to everybody after the webinar by email. Closing question, what do you think are the greatest challenges or obstacles to overcome in land conservation and public water system collaboration? This is to everybody.
So Tariq, you want to take that one first?
The obvious one is, you know, I think it's such a huge animal that it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of resources. And the expectation is, you know, immediate results, and that's not the reality. I think you have to be prepared to make gradual and incremental improvements, and if you can accept that, I think you won't be disappointed. You still just you need to make sure that, again, you stay focused on your priorities and not have a shotgun effect, if you will.
Yeah, and this is Jimmy. I think what I would add to that, and Tariq is exactly right. Many times we're working with landowners and others that are in the public sector, and once we install a conservation practice, they anticipate immediate results. And generally, there's going to be, particularly from sediment and water quality pollutants related to sediments, there's going to be a long-term impact downstream. And then the other thing is just an awareness of the magnitude of the issue. That one slide I showed is we got well over 6 million, probably well over 8 million agricultural fields that can offer diffuse non-point source pollution out there across the landscape. And so when we talk about what we collectively can do, there's also some more private sector incentives that are coming over the horizon. And what's critical, I think, is making sure that as they want to make investments, and I'm talking about groups like Land O'Lakes, Syngenta, Monsanto, and others, as they want to make investments in conservation, that they're doing so in such a fashion, or their clients are doing so in such a fashion that they can be assured of the outcome associated with installing that conservation practice. This is where the science infusion into our conservation practices helps give everybody the assurance that we're going to get that outcome and that benefit. We, through that SEEP program I mentioned earlier, estimate that there's roughly $18.6 billion a year needed for just cropland conservation investments. And I mentioned at the outset of this teleconference or this webinar that NRCS has roughly $4 billion that we have to offer. So, and even with the partnerships and the $6 billion that was identified early on, well, that's a lot of money. It just gives you a sense of the magnitude of the challenge that we have in front of us and the need to continue to work together to try to address those highest priorities.
So what I would like to add to that is, you know, and this was said earlier, it's really important to understand the problem and the source of the problem. And then we have to do that through assessment. And so it's important to do that assessment work so we can better direct the limited resources we have to get the most out of the money that we spend. And so that's one thing. A second thing is the partnerships are critical for being successful. Our projects are successful because all of our partners are involved in them and contribute to them, and they understand the project and they understand the outcome. And developing partnerships where entities trust each other and rely on each other will help us to address these huge problems we face today. So.
All right, well, thank you all. I wanted to say especially thank you to Jimmy, thank you to Sandy, thank you to Tariq for all of your hard work in making this webinar happen. I want to remind everybody on the call to visit the Learning Exchange website on the Source Water Collaborative website so that you can access these and other valuable resources. Here are some other items, some other websites for you to check out as well for each of our presenters and for the Source Water Collaborative. And look forward to all of you attending future webinars, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.